$7 for a can that's mostly propellant. Most of it evaporates before it ever reaches the surface you're treating. The actual active ingredient, the stuff doing any real work, makes up maybe 15% of that can. You've been paying for air, and the machine that gets you to keep buying that air is one of the most successful marketing operations of the last 60 years. Not because the product is fraudulent, it does something, just not the thing you think it does. And definitely not as well as the $2 alternative that professional machinists and restoration hobbyists have been quietly using it for decades. Here's what almost nobody tells you about WD-40. The name literally stands for Water Displacement 40th Attempt. It was developed in 1953 by the Rocket Chemical Company for the aerospace industry. The original job was to prevent corrosion on Atlas missile components. That's it. That was always the full scope of it. Water displacement, a surface treatment, a temporary barrier. It was never meant to be a lubricant, not a real one, not a penetrating oil you could trust in a mechanical joint, not a rust converter, not a protectant. Those are claims that grew up around the brand because the product was everywhere and people started using it for everything. Some of those uses work reasonably well for a while. Some of them actively cause damage. Here's the part that made me genuinely stop and reconsider everything the first time I looked into it. WD-40 leaves behind a petroleum residue that attracts dust and grime. Spray it on a hinge, it frees the hinge, and 6 months later that same hinge is seized worse than before because that residue has been collecting particles and hardening. Spray it on a lock cylinder and you'll be drilling that lock out within a few years. The can solves a problem today and manufactures a worse problem for the future. And when the future comes, you go buy another can. Machinists in the 1930s and 1940s, before the consumer lubricant market existed in any recognizable form, mixed their own penetrating oils from raw compounds they bought by weight at industrial supply counters. These weren't trade secrets. They were taught in trade schools, written into workshop manuals, discussed openly. The formulas were simple, the ingredients were cheap, and the results outperformed almost anything you can buy in a pressurized can today. One formula in particular kept showing up in everything I read: restoration guides, metalworking forums, old machinist manuals, scanned and uploaded by collectors. The Navy used variants of it on fleet machinery during World War II. Industrial maintenance crews in the Midwest kept it in plain glass jars on their workbench shelves. It was standard, unremarkable, as common in those environments as a rag. Then the post-war consumer economy arrived. Disposable products, national distribution, marketing budgets. And within a decade, the knowledge of how to mix your own shop-grade penetrating fluid essentially vanished from popular consciousness. Not because anyone took it away, because it became easier, and eventually culturally normal, to reach for a branded can than to spend 3 minutes mixing something yourself. The formula that kept the old-timers coming back has 2 ingredients. One of them you almost certainly have in your house right now. The other costs about $2 at any hardware or home improvement store. Understanding why this works requires a short detour into what rust actually is and why most commercial products fail to address it properly. Rust isn't damage sitting on top of metal. Rust is the metal itself in a different chemical state. Iron atoms that bonded with oxygen molecules, producing iron oxide. When you look at a rusted surface and see that orange-brown flaking, you're looking at material that was once structurally part of the metal. It's gone, converted. What a penetrating fluid really has to do, is get down into the pores and microfractures of that oxidized surface, break the bond between the rust and the underlying metal, and carry away or convert the loosened material. The WD-40 does the first part reasonably well. The petroleum distillates it's made from are thin enough to wick into tight spaces, but they don't react with iron oxide. They slide past it. They might free a seized bolt by lubricating the threads just enough to allow movement, but the rust is still there. The corrosion is still there. You've addressed the symptom, not the chemistry. What the old formula does is different. It reacts. It converts iron oxide at the molecular level rather than just slipping around it. Modern commercial rust treatments that do convert rather than just coat, products like naval jelly or rust converters, work on the same basic principle. An acidic compound reacts with iron oxide, converting it into a more stable compound that doesn't continue degrading. The problem with most commercial versions is twofold. They're thick, so they don't penetrate into threaded connections or tight tolerances, and they leave a surface coating that needs to be neutralized or removed before painting or reassembly. The 2-ingredient formula doesn't have either problem. It's thin enough to wick. It self-neutralizes as it reacts. And it leaves a very light residual film that actually inhibits further oxidation rather than inviting it. Here's exactly what you need. Acetone. Regular hardware store, acetone. The kind sold as paint thinner or nail polish remover in the larger bottles. This is the carrier agent. It's thin, it evaporates fast, and it carries the second ingredient into every gap and thread it can reach. Automatic transmission fluid, not motor oil, not penetrating oil. ATF, automatic transmission fluid. It's sold in quart bottles for $1 to $2 at almost every auto parts store, hardware store, and many big box home improvement stores. The specific compound responsible for ATF's effectiveness in this formula is its detergent additive package. Most ATF formulations contain a blend of surfactants and mild acid compounds, specifically engineered to break down oxidized petroleum products and metal contamination inside transmissions. That chemistry, diluted and carried in acetone, works on surface rust and seized fasteners, with a consistency that still surprises people when they first try it. Equal parts, 1 part acetone, 1 part ATF. Mix them in any container you're not planning to store food in afterward. Shake or stir. That's the entire process. The resulting fluid is thin, orange-amber in color, and smells like a combination of solvent and gear oil. Apply it with a small brush, a cloth, an eyedropper for tight spaces, or pour it directly onto whatever you're working on. Standard precautions apply here. Gloves, ventilation, keep it away from open flame since acetone is flammable. Same basic precautions as any shop chemical. What happens in the first few minutes is visible. The ATF's color will bleed into whatever surface you've applied it to as the acetone draws it down into the pores. You may see rust coloration begin to shift from orange to brownish black. That's the acid components working. Let it sit. For a stubbornly seized bolt, apply it, wait 20 minutes, apply it again. Tap the bolt lightly if you can. Vibration helps the fluid penetrate deeper into threads. For general rust treatment on flat surfaces, home tools, hardware, metal furniture, apply generously. Let it sit for 2 to 4 hours, then wipe off the excess. A stiff brush or fine steel wool will remove loosened surface rust. What remains after wiping isn't a greasy film. It's a very light surface treatment that slows reoxidation. I tested this against WD-40 on 6 different problem spots over 3 weeks in my own workshop. A drawer slider that had been sticking for 2 years. 3 seized lag screws from an outdoor fence project I'd given up on. 2 old hand plane bodies with serious surface rust that I'd been meaning to address since I bought them at an estate sale. The WD-40 freed the drawer slider on the first application. It reseized within 2 weeks. The ATF acetone mixture freed it on the first application. 3 weeks later, it's still moving smoothly. I'll check it again in 3 months, the lag screws. This is where the difference becomes stark. WD-40 freed one of the 3, needed significant torque, strip adjacent. The other 2 I couldn't move at all. After an overnight soak with the ATF acetone mixture, all 3 broke free cleanly. No stripping. The threaded engagement felt almost new. The hand planes were the most dramatic. I applied the mixture liberally, covered them in cloth to prevent evaporation, and left them for 6 hours. The surface rust on both wiped off like soot. The underlying metal was clean, dark gray, slightly waxy from the ATF residue. Both went directly onto the workbench with no further treatment. Neither has shown any new rust in the time since. Total cost of the ATF and the acetone for all of that, under $5. The bottle of ATF was $1.80. The acetone I already had, but a full quart, runs about $6 and will outlast a case of WD-40. This isn't a laboratory result or a theory. It's a technique that serious metalworkers and restorers reach for, because it actually solves the underlying chemical problem instead of temporarily masking it. The person who's been frustrated by WD-40 that doesn't hold, fasteners that re-seize, rust that keeps coming back, that frustration is legitimate. You weren't using the wrong product because you didn't do the research. You are using the wrong product because the right product doesn't have a television commercial. Once you've mixed this and used it once, the WD-40 can become a backup you keep for guests who don't know better. The formula sits in a jar on your bench. It takes 30 seconds to make more. You never run out at an inconvenient moment because you ran out of a specific brand. If you've been dealing with any kind of rust or seized fastener frustration and haven't tried this, mix a small batch this weekend and test it on one thing, just one. The result will either confirm everything I just said, or it won't. But either way, you'll have spent $2.20 finding out the truth for yourself, rather than taking anyone's word for it. If this kind of practical, forgotten knowledge is useful to you, there's considerably more where it came from. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you've got a version of this formula you've been using, or if your results don't match mine, drop it in the comments. That's where the real knowledge sharing actually happens.